Your followers had to make a lot of sacrifices, Mr. Gandhi, and so did we. People went to jail, many gave their lives, but how do we prepare for the sacrifices?
You don't need any advice from me on that front, Martin. I'm thinking of all the brave people of Montgomery who boycotted the buses and were walking to work for months, and the students who marched, and the people who did sit-ins at lunch counters, and all the volunteers who registered voters and so on. You know, when you have the moral high ground, human beings are naturally drawn to it. Now, Mrs. Sparks, I think you and I have something in common. I got booted off a train in South Africa soon after I got there. It was a rude awakening for me about the plight of colored people. And that started me on the path of nonviolent resistance. I know you got thrown off a bus in Montgomery, off a bus, and I know that is a turning point in the nonviolent struggle here in America.
I never thought about the similarity. Now, I wasn't trying to be heroic, to tell you the truth, but I was tired. Tired of giving in. Now, we're just ordinary women, Mr. Gandhi, but we were willing and ready to do our part to work for the struggle for social justice.
Oh, you're being too modest, my dear Rosa. You're a true leader. You lead by example.
Well, I was taught that I was a person with dignity and that I deserved to have self-respect and that I shouldn't set my sights lower than anybody else simply because I was black.
No, it must have been pretty rare for a black woman to get an education those days. Now, who else besides your teachers inspired you?
No, you're so right. It was a real opportunity for me to be able to get a high school diploma. Not very many women in Alabama at that time could get one. It took me till I was 20 years old, but I did get one. But beside my teacher, Miss Alice White, Septima Clark was a huge influence on me. Going to her workshops at the Highlander School, that was a turning point in my life. I just hope that some of her dignity and wisdom and courage would just rub off on me. And my own dear mother, Mrs. Leona McCauley, she was the biggest influence on me because of her commitment to social justice and her own strong moral character. And of course, my husband, Raymond, he was a member of the NAACP, one of the early activists. And if it hadn't been for him, I probably wouldn't even have gotten involved. But weren't the women in India involved in the struggle for justice as well, for independence?
Of course. We had many women leaders. We are quite fortunate. My wife, Kasturba, was with me every inch of the way and wasn't afraid to go to jail. And there was Sarojini Naidu and Annie Besant and Sushila Nayar and so many others who really stepped up to the front.
Well, Mr. Gandhi, what do you think about society and tradition and what society says women ought to do?
You know, all societies have traditions. And I'm all for us to swim in the waters of tradition. But to sink in them is suicide. To call woman the weaker sex is really libel. It's man's injustice to woman. Now, if by strength you mean brute strength, of course, woman is less brute than man. But if by strength you mean moral power, then woman is immeasurably man's superior. Who else can make a more effective appeal to the heart than women? What are your thoughts, Martin?
Well, for me, women like Julia Ward Howe and Susan B. Anthony and Septima Clark were great inspirations. One of my pet peeves is that many people do not recognize the great contributions of Septima Clark to the civil rights movement. She was a trailblazer. History will one day record her huge role, too. Women are the peacemakers. Julia Ward Howe meant Mother's Day to be a day about peace. We tend to forget that. Mr. Gandhi, you've written about war. Perhaps you can share your thoughts with us about that.
Martin, you and I share a common hatred for war. But on the other hand, I'm afraid the world is heading for a nuclear Armageddon. You know, the kind of perfect flood that the Bible talks about. You may be surprised to hear me say this. It's better to fight a violent war than accept injustice. So there's really no contradiction in believing in a just war and believing in nonviolence. Both are duties to be carried out to preserve truth and justice. Now, I wrote to President Roosevelt in 1942 saying that America should support independence for India and the countries of Africa. Now, I also pointed out to him that if the Allies are really fighting to defend freedom, they ought to start off by offering independence to all the countries under colonial rule. I also told them that Negroes in America did not have true freedom. Now, I don't think President Roosevelt was happy about my letter. Now, I wasn't trying to embarrass him, but just telling him the truth as a friend.
We are no longer facing a choice between violence and non-violence. It is either non-violence or non-existence. If we don't disarm, suspend nuclear tests, and strengthen the United Nations, we may plunge civilization into an abyss of annihilation, and this earth would be transformed into an inferno that even the mind of Dante couldn't imagine. We must live together as brothers or perish together as fools.
Well put, Martin.
I feel it's time for me to speak out more on issues like poverty. Besides issues of equality that we're fighting for now. A nation that spends so much money on year after year on military defense or on programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual doom, in my opinion. I know some of my friends are not comfortable with hearing me talk about this, but on some positions, cowardice asks the question, is it expedient? And then expedience comes along and asks the question, is it politic? Vanity asks the question, is it popular? Conscience asks the question, is it right? So there comes a time when one must take the position that is neither safe, nor politic, nor popular, but he must do it because his conscience tells him it is the right thing to do.
You know, poverty is the worst form of violence. When the gap between the haves and the have-nots keeps getting wider, and society is indifferent about it, that's really a recipe for the collapse of society. So I'm glad you're ready to speak up about it. So go where your conscience leads you, Martin. Now, what are your plans for the future?
Well, I don't have any children of my own, but I've always enjoyed working with the youth, so I want to continue to do that. They're our salvation. We have to make educating our young people a top priority, because if we don't, all the rights that we have now or that we ever hope to get won't make any difference if we lose them.
Well, the world is a much better place for having leaders like you. I wish both of you Godspeed. Namaste.